So hello and welcome to the Jefferson Educational Society's digital programming. I'm Ben Spagan and I'm the Vice President at the Jefferson Educational Society and I'm a contributing editor at the Erie Reader. Joining me in this conversation is Dr. Andre Perry. Dr. Perry is a fellow at the Metropolitan Policy Program at the Brookings Institution, a scholar in residence at American University, and a columnist for the Hechinger Report. He is the author of the new book, Know Your Price, Valuing Black Lives and Property in America's Black Cities, which is currently available wherever books are sold. A nationally known and respected commentator on race, structural inequality, and education, Dr. Perry is a regular contributor to MSNBC and has been published by the New York Times, The Nation, The Washington Post, TheRoot.com, and CNN.com. For a full bio of Dr. Perry's accomplishments, including his graduation from Allegheny College just down the road from Erie, Pennsylvania, please do visit brookings.edu. Dr. Perry is here to discuss his recently released book, Know Your Price, publishing and discussing it amidst a pandemic. Today's conversation about race in America, the Black Lives Matter movement, and more. Since this program is first airing live on the Jefferson's Facebook page, we're going to work our way through as many questions from you, the viewers, as we can as we host this event. If you have a question, please just leave it in the comments section below. And for more information about upcoming Jefferson Educational Society programs and publications, please do visit our website at jeserie.org and like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter and Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Dr. Andre Perry, thank you for joining me for this discussion.
Hey, you're welcome. Thanks for having me. And great shout out to Allegheny College in Meadville, Pennsylvania. Go Meadville.
And go Meadville. We are excited to have a Western Pennsylvania fellow with us today. And that is one of the cities in your book that you talk about, growing up in Pittsburgh, just outside of Pittsburgh. And I want to get there, but I want to start at the very beginning of this book, of Know Your Price. The dedication you feature is for incarcerated parents, their children, and caretakers. You were not to blame. Dr. Perry, why is it important for you that readers begin there, to encounter those words first?
You know, there's a white supremacist myth that states that the conditions of Black cities and neighborhoods are a direct result of the people within them. But when you look at the research, you see that policy has devalued people as well as the institutions that Black people utilize in ways that inhibits economics and social mobility. And I can't think of a single institution that extracts more wealth and talent and lives than the criminal justice system. And too often we've blamed Black people for things that really were out of our control. And so I dedicate that to those who have parents who've been incarcerated. And I'm one of them, that my father was incarcerated and he died in a prison outside of Detroit. And I seldom talk about that story, but this book in many ways is a redemptive story for my father and others and other children who had to deal with the burden of an incarcerated parent. So I wanted to open that book with a dedication that is befitting of the times and also just reflects the nature of my work. So yeah.
One of the things that I think is so powerful about this book is you telling the story through you, using your own story as a vehicle for that. I can't imagine that was easy to sit down and put that into context and match it with examinations of Black majority cities, policy where it's failing, policy that might work, and really unpacking that conversation. Just tell me a little bit about the decision to incorporate yourself, because you said it's not something you often talk about, and here you were the vehicle to get this whole thing started.
You know, when you're talking about the conditions of Black cities and Black lives in particular, I can't remove myself from that analysis. And all research is really personal. If we were honest, we would share the biases and the background of our own personal story, because it ultimately impacts how we frame and research the topic. So for me, I wanted to be upfront to say, hey, I'm from a Black majority city. I've lived in several, and many of the assets, many of the firms, the institutions, the homes are great assets, but they are devalued by policy. And so I'm impacted by that. My son is impacted by that. My family's impacted by that. And so I wanted to make this book very personal. And it's not personalized in a way that makes me look good, and folks will see that I've made a lot of mistakes in my life. But I wanted to tell a story about my life, about my friends' lives, about people we know in Black communities that are doing everything required of the American dream, but just not getting the benefits. And so, you know, what people will find when they buy Know Your Price and they read it, it's not a straight policy book. There's a lot of data in there, no question about it. But there's a lot of storytelling because my research works through the lived experience. It doesn't go against it. And so I really wanted folks to see themselves in the stories that I tell, and hopefully I accomplished that goal.
Well, I think that's one of the really refreshing things about a policy book is that it becomes personal, and it's not just the data. And the data is great. I can't praise you enough for that, and the importance of it that I hope people find as well when they read it. But it's really refreshing, and I appreciate that. One of the things you've said in other interviews is that we've all heard the not so subtle dig. It all starts at home, and it's not so implicit charge that change toward a perceived better is a march toward what are valued as white middle class standards. Can you unpack some of that for us in our collective conscious, how we think as a nation, and move toward better by putting something else at the center that's very specific, a white middle class?
You know, I'll tell a little bit of story how I was raised. When I was born, the story was told to me that there was an older woman in the neighborhood that took me in because my mother, when I was at the time I was born, was poor. There may have been abuse involved. My father, as I mentioned, was in and out of prison. So like many families in Black neighborhoods, I was informally adopted. I was taken in by a caretaker by the name of Elsie Boyd. She took in kids from all over the city. She watched them, some for a few weeks, some for a few months. My brothers and me stayed until we graduated from high school. So, but when I went to college, it was then I read the Moynihan Report, you know, that study that had a structural analysis in 1965 of the conditions that Black people live in. But it set a horrible example of misstating that the cause of poverty were related to Black women's marital behaviors. And when I looked at that report, it was essentially saying that my family was deviant, that it was putting me in harm's way. And, you know, I knew at the time that my family adapted to the conditions of Pittsburgh at the time. It was under significant duress. U.S. Steel left town. Unemployment rate was 20%, which meant it's probably 40% for Black Americans, because we know when Black people, when white people catch a cold, Black people catch pneumonia, COVID, or the flu, whatever you want to say. But my family stepped up. Elsie Boyd stepped up when policy did not. And so, and that's the way we look at Black families today. We're constantly comparing them to white middle class families, establishing white middle class norms, and without giving us white middle class money, by the way. And so I think as folks will see, I wanted to break that up, that there is no standard, and where the way researchers are trained, we're actually trained oftentimes to compare ourselves to white families, to white people. The problem with that is you never get to invest in Black people in that way. When Black folk in research are pitted as needing to catch up to white people, you invest in white people to fix the Black people. And no one invests in problems. So what I do with my research is I show where there's strength in Black communities. And there is strength, and we'll go into this later. But I wanted to show strength because ultimately that's where investment goes. And so a lot of my research does not delve into this disparity research that compares Black people to white people as a way to saying Black people need to catch up in order to have parity or justice. But it is to say that there is strength in Black communities. We need to measure it. We need to analyze it. We need to remove the barriers, and we need to invest in that strength. And so a lot of this, it goes back to what you asked earlier, what was the motivation behind the book? It is rooted in family. It is to say that there was nothing wrong with my family. In fact, I say throughout the book that there's nothing wrong with Black people that ending racism can't solve. We got to stop blaming Black people and stop that language of, oh, it all starts at home, to suggest that we're doing something wrong in terms of home training and all this stuff. No, policy has a lot to do with the behaviors in the hood. And we need to address policy failure more so than the individual failings and thoughts of moral corruption and things like that.
And in fact, your pinned tweet on Twitter has you wearing a T-shirt with that there's nothing wrong with Black people that ending racism can't solve. And I've got to encourage folks to go follow you on Twitter. You are a prolific tweeter. You put out a lot of great information. But in the context of that tweet, you actually add protesters are not the problem. The policy violence leveled on Black people in neighborhoods here is my call to action. And you're holding the book, and there's a link to the book. I want to get to the call to ending racism, but first, it is hard to ignore that you published a book, a must-read for policymakers, I think nationwide, but you published a book in the midst of a pandemic. No one ever anticipates that. How has the COVID-19 crisis affected your call to action?
Well, I've been saying that there's never a bad time to release a book on structural inequality because something's always negative happening, and so and I really do mean that yes, there's COVID and it's an unprecedented event, but in my lifetime, I have to deal with, I lived in New Orleans during Hurricane Katrina. We all dealt with the housing bubble. We have COVID, there was the tech crash. And in each instance, Black people took 2 steps back because policies have never restored the value that's been extracted by racism. And eventually we need to correct for these structural problems before the next epidemic happens. When COVID came out, it became clear that Black people and our relationship to structural racism is a primary cause for the disproportionate amount of death in communities. COVID does not discriminate, but our past policies have. So our housing quality, the lack of jobs with quality benefits, the lack of hazard pay for many essential workers. These are all policy decisions that disproportionately impact Black people. So again, there's nothing wrong with Black people that ending racism can't solve. We need to address the policies that create disproportionate death among Black Americans, disfavoring Black Americans. We need to solve for the issues and stop trying to fix Black people. And that's what my call to action is.
And I think that you frame that so well in the book of the conflation of fixing and helping. And in fact, you put it to something to the effect of, if you have one message for white people, it's not to fix Black people. Black people don't need to be fixed, and that fixing is not helping. You do such a great job on unpacking that. And so I'd love to hear you speak to that for just a moment. And I want to get into ending racism, what that actually looks like as a goal.
Well, I worked a lot in education. A lot of people know me from education. I can't, the field itself somewhat is predicated on how to teach white people, or how to teach Black people how to behave white. When a Black person gets into Yale, for instance, there's some kind of super celebration, not just because it's a selective institution, but because it's a white selective institution. And we're like, wow, that's great. I mean, and not necessarily caring about how that person will fit or succeed in that institution, and not whether that person could have gone to a HBCU or a minority serving institution. It would have been, it's equally as important in terms of outcomes in some cases. So I wanted to show that we don't have to be compared to white people. We don't need to be fixed to act more white. What ultimately we want is for what to deprivilege, and a lot of this is getting in how you define racism. But one of the things what we need to do is deprioritize whiteness as a goal in policy. We constantly privilege whiteness in the way we finance schools, or in the way we distribute loans, for instance, business loans, as you saw with the PPP loan fiasco, with few Black businesses actually getting that subsidy. But we got to stop privileging whiteness in our policy. And that's just hard for us to do, because we assume that that's the standard. And that to be white, middle class, that's what we all should want. When you're talking about public policy, we should not center a white person. But we constantly do that. So a lot of this book is examines how we center white people in policy, and the goal is to remove whiteness from the center of policy and policy making, so we can have more equitable outcomes.
Well, I know one of the goals is the researchers are not going to write another Moynihan report, and your book does such a great job of working to ensure that. And so it's a great hope that it's not going to happen. But back to the t-shirt, ending racism. I want to bring that up because in our city, our mayor, Joe Schember, has publicly said numerous times that if he were to accomplish just one thing during his time as mayor, it would be to end racism. So Erie's the patient, and you're the policy doctor with the Know Your Price pharmacy buffet, your prescription pad at hand. After our first visit, what does policy prescription look like that you would want to write? That is, what's the most effective place to start if the end goal is to end racism? And that seems like a huge goal. If it's tough to get to, where do we start? Where do cities like Erie, Pennsylvania start?
Well, the first place to start is with Black people in Erie. I will say that oftentimes we have solutions that are completely dismissed by government officials, by think tanks, by you name it, from people who actually have solutions. A lot of my solutions in the book I got from people doing the work in their locations. Another thing is somewhat of a small announcement. Folks will hear in the fall that I'm partnering with the Ashoka social entrepreneurship organization. It's called Ashoka. And we're going to have a $1 million challenge where we are going to give away $1 million of prize money to folks who are working on housing devaluation. If there's a short answer to your question is, I want people to work on housing devaluation. But we'll be giving money to people who will try to look at things like housing affordability, try to figure out ways to regulate housing prices that make sense. It might be solutions in the appraisal industry or with lending. But there are a lot of things around housing that we can learn from people on the ground doing this work. And so I want to find people who are proximate to the problem and incentivize them for finding solutions. So yes, I think housing is central into eradicating racism. We have to figure out ways for people to have an equal shot at owning a home or anchoring themselves in a community. And I think racism has prevented many Black people from doing that. And if we can work on those issues, it would be a major step. But there's no shortage of solutions in education, in business, in infrastructure. There are lots of solutions out there. We just need to make sure that we find them by primarily talking to the folks in communities first and foremost.
First, congratulations, and second, and thank you for that. But congratulations on that. That sounds like an outstanding initiative. I have to imagine folks in Erie are excited to hear that, because a comprehensive plan done for our city in 2016 looked at our housing stock, and we have much more stock than we have residents, but we need to work on balancing that, and we need to work on getting renters to be home buyers, and we need to work on improving neighborhoods and investing in them. So but
to get there, clearly we need a solution in creating some type of mortgage products that enables low-income residents to purchase homes that are priced below a certain price point where banks won't back. And so that requires new loan products. So if we can find people who can work on that, that's fine. We need new credit scoring systems that enable, like, as you said, renters who are paying bills on time regularly, to be able to use that information to purchase a home. So there are very practical solutions that are out there, and we need people to pursue them. But hopefully the Ashoka Brookings relationship and challenge competition will unearth many of these solutions in Erie and in the region, so that other people can take those solutions where conditions are similar and run with it.
I want to shift, because Dr. Perry, I feel like I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you about education today in wake of the pandemic, and ask you just to comment on that and help us make sense of it. I saw the other day the front page of the Miami Herald, and it seemed to me that there were seemingly contradictory stories. On one half, you had Miami-Dade restaurants, gyms closing to fight COVID surge. On the left half of the front page, Florida schools ordered to reopen in August. What does this say about us? And how do we treat education through this? How do we solve this? I know that's a big ask.
No, but working parents really do want to have schools open for their own sanity, and because it is hard to teach students from home, and kids need social interactions with other kids. They need exercise. They need learning. School's important, but we should not go to school in ways that's dangerous to children or the adults working in them. And right now, there is mixed messages. People are only looking at opening schools, for the most part, to enable workers to go back to work. And while that's important, it's not the reason why we should open up schools. And we're still waiting. States are still waiting for the federal government, for legislators to deliver a relief package to states that will enable schools to open safely. And we should not expect schools to just open regularly. We would be putting people in harm's way. And let's be careful with the teacher population that are 55 and older. Know that they are at risk for a higher risk for higher morbidity with COVID. And when I worked in New Orleans during the time of Katrina, after that economic shock, we saw a lot of teachers 55 and older take early retirement. And so the way to avoid that is by making sure districts have the resources they need to actually open safely. And putting a ton of pressure on schools to open without providing them the resources to do that is really irresponsible. So parents will make the best decisions for their children, but we should not set up parents and children for failure by not providing the resources states and districts needs to open up schools.
Dr. Perry, when somebody says to you, when somebody responds to Black Lives Matter and says to you, all lives matter, what do you say?
Oh, clearly the data doesn't suggest that. When you have a Black man killed in the middle of the street in broad daylight with casually, a cop puts their knee in the back, that's a statement of you don't belong in society. It's a statement that you don't belong in the economy. I say that all the time. A police killing an unarmed Black person, which happens more with Black people, is a statement that Black people don't belong in an economy. And my research is clear. I looked at housing prices in Black majority neighborhoods, compared them to housing prices in white neighborhoods after controlling for education, crime, walkability, all those fancy Zillow metrics. We find that homes in Black neighborhoods are devalued, meaning they are undervalued by 23%, about $48,000 per home. That amounts to about $156 billion in lost equity just because of the concentration of Blackness around it. The same attitudes that Derek Chauvin had that led him to casually put his knee in the back of the neck of George Floyd, or the same attitudes lenders have, real estate agents have, that employers have. And so, the data that Black lives are valued less than white lives, it's clear. It's absolutely clear. And so I would say, look at the facts and let the facts be the judge. But more importantly, it's when people say all lives matter, it's just an abdication of their responsibility to own up to the injustices that have been leveled against Black people for generations. And that needs to just stop. It just needs to stop. People have explained what Black Lives Matter mean. If you don't get it now, you just don't want to believe Black Lives Matter. And so, which is, so that's just a debate now that is only held in the mind of someone who doesn't value Black people. That's the only debate with that mantra.
Dr. Perry, I appreciate your time. I know we're short on it and we're about out of it here. With that in mind, aside from the obvious answer I would give, which is to go buy, know your price. Somebody who asks you and says, Dr. Perry, okay, I'm on board. I want to help, but I don't know where to start. There's a lot to unpack. I've looked at the data. I understand. Aside from go buy, know your price, which I'm recommending is the answer, what do you say? Where do people start?
I think this is the time where folks should be joining an organization focused on ending racial inequality. Whether it's your Urban League, NAACP, Movement for Black Lives, join a Black-led organization that's focused on closing many of these disparities and ending racism. And people who are focused on dismantling the architecture of inequality. You should be joining forces with those folks and organizations. So I would say join an organization, be a part of something different than what you're currently a part of. And if we're all in this together, then we should be willing to work together to end racial equality, because that's what's keeping folks back. If there's a lesson learned from COVID, it's that when our neighbors are sick, we are then vulnerable. And so let's end the sickness by eradicating racism and structural inequality in this country.
Dr. Perry, fellow with the Brookings Institution and author of the outstanding must-read of the now Know Your Price Valuing Black Lives and Property in America's Black Cities. Thank you for taking time this afternoon to join us for Jefferson Programming today. We really appreciate this.
And I'd like to thank the folks at Jefferson Keep doing good work. Thank you.
We appreciate it. Thanks to all of you for watching along at home, tuning in the live broadcast and a later event. For those looking to connect with you, Dr. Perry, and follow along, where should we point people, especially to go get the book? Where can we point them?
Oh, I would say go get the book from any online local or local outlet that's open. I prefer folks going to their local indie bookstore if that's possible. You can also order from bookshop.org. If you want to support local bookshops, or you can always order from Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and those bigger outlets. But try to support your local booksellers. They also sell books online as well. So go out there and support the local economy.
And we'll make sure we put information for that in the comment section for this program. And follow Dr. Perry on Twitter, Andre Perry EDU. You'll find him there. You'll also find his full bio on brookings.edu. For more information on both past and upcoming Jefferson Educational Society events, as well as publications, please do visit our website, jeserie.org. Be sure to like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter and Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. For the Jefferson Educational Society, I'm Ben Spagan. Be safe, be sound, and thanks for listening and learning with us.